Monday through Sunday, 7-day calendar. We actually operate on a 4-day ritual calendar in voodoo that starts over every 4 days. And each day represents a different set of deities, maybe of earth or of water or fire, that we acknowledge, that we placate within the system. And these are things that, again, I believe we would not have lost or forgotten. I know I can do a lot of talking, so I want you to be able to ask your questions. I'm sure some of you might have questions or even comments.
I have two. What is Yoruba?
Yoruba is
Yoruba.
An ethnic group in Nigeria.
Okay.
Now,
I thought you
Nigeria,
were saying Europa, like Europe, but
I'm just-
that wasn't what you were saying.
no, it's Yoruba. Nigeria, just alone, probably has 200 ethnic groups. Yoruba is just one of them. But somehow it has become the most prominent and most recognizable one here in America and in the UK and the West, in terms of how we associate not only voodoo, but traditional West African systems.
And the other thing was voodoo dolls. Is that part of voodoo, or is that kind of like
That's voodoo dolls, as we know them, is a complete fabrication.
Okay.
There are fetishes in West Africa made of stone, made of wood, that would have been used to mark a blessing, for instance. So a particular deity in a particular village was known to heal, and every time the child, the adult came there and found healing, they would insert a nail or a piece of glass as technology entered West Africa into a particular fetish. That was then turned into the voodoo doll in the West imagination. We don't use voodoo dolls. We don't stick pins in things to cause harm to people. No form of that.
So I can throw
is
my
real.
voodoo doll away?
Yeah. Look, it might be a cute throw on Mardi Gras thing, but it's not real voodoo, no.
I don't have a voodoo.
What is today in the voodoo calendar?
That's why I brought this. Today we acknowledge Shango, and when we say Shango, we say Kabio Sile, because it's taboo to say Shango. We must use one of his praise names. So I say Kabio Sile is one of his praise names. And the other deity that we acknowledge today is Oya. Oya. And Oya is the mother of Iyami. 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 And the Iyami represents the power of women. Now, in English, in the West, it is unfortunately directly translated as witchcraft. And even now in the Christianized Africa, Islamicized Africa, it is viewed as witchcraft. And it's become a problem because they are harming and killing and secluding both children and old people out of this fear of witchcraft. But Iyami is really the power of women. Just imagine, and we have plenty of women in the room, just passing out a child, or more than one child, is seen as an act of God. It's seen as an act of great creation. So the power of women is seen as greater than humanity itself, almost to a point of fear. But it's represented by the power of women, and Iyami is implicit in the masquerade of Galete, our great mothers. So it represents the power of our mothers, the power of our grandmothers, and their ability to create and recreate and create bloodlines and create lineages and all those things. Does that answer your question?
I need some coffee. Take a break?
Yeah, I'm done unless someone else has a question.
Well, will you tell us the 4 days
Sure.
and why 4?
Now, I can't tell you why. I wish I could tell you why they only have a 4-day calendar. It may have something to do, in my understanding, with the moon cycle, and more indigenous cultures follow the moon cycle as opposed to a sun cycle. So I believe that's what it is. Today is Shango Oya. Tomorrow is Obatala, which governs the head, and it's also said to be Father God in Yoruba culture, so he created the human body. The next day is Fa or Ifa, the day of divination. That day also covers Oshun, Yemiya, Aje, which is the power of luck, if you will, in Yoruba. And then the next day is Ogun, which is seen as iron, machetes, building the foundation, clearing the land. And so on these days, there are certain activities that we do to not only acknowledge those powers, but to also bring that power into your life. So if you want to create something, build something new, start something, you might do that on Ogun's day, because he's good at building a foundation and laying down the structure that something can be built upon. If you need clarity to see something, you might choose Ifa's day, and you might consult a practitioner or a Babalawo or Ianifa, which is a female Babalawo, and have a consultation done. So that's how we operate within the calendar here in the West now. But it's much more rigid and structured in West Africa still till this day with those who are still practicing the traditional faiths.
Is there a special holy day? You know, like the Sabbath or?
We do, because of amalgamation and syncretization, we do use Christian holidays for our own. So we might acknowledge Sunday, but in a different way. However, we do have special days throughout the year that acknowledge these deities or the birth of ancestors. For instance, the Voodoo New Year falls in January. And so there's a huge festival in Benin, Togo, West Africa, where all voodoo songs from all over the world go there and participate in this festival. The New Year for the Yoruba is in June. So our calendar, for those of us who follow the Yoruba tradition, starts over again in June. And there's this huge, what's called Ita, which is a huge reading that's done for the entire community during the month of June. And now with technology, you know, it's on Facebook, Instagram, everybody has access to it, and it speaks to almost like the Chinese New Year. What forces are at work this year? What things you might need to be concerned about this year? And it translates out into the greater Ifa community. Did I answer your question?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Thank you.
Did have I'd heard that there are different levels of priestesses and priests in the voodoo tradition, and I was wondering, how is that passed on and how does one advance?
That's important. That's critically important, particularly when we think about voodoo in New Orleans. As I said before, voodoo is often thought of as the bastard child of traditional African religions. So often people think if I need to be accurate, if I need to be correct, if I need to be orthodox, maybe it's a good word, I need to go to Nigeria. I need to go to Haiti. I need to go to Brazil. I believe this is a product of bias. This is a product of availability or lack thereof for the average African American. When we think about Cuba, Nigeria, Brazil, many of these families are born right into this tradition. Parents, grandparents, families are already fully immersed in this. That's often not the case, even till this day in America, that's still not the case. So in terms of ranking, it depends on the lineage and the tradition for which you are now initiating into. So when we think of Ifa, for instance, Yoruba specific, often that's referred to as Nago in the New World, as in terms of Ifa, in comparison to Lukomi, which is done in Cuba, and Santeria, which is done in Puerto Rico. They're each going to have their own rules, their own protocols as to how you come in and then how you advance. Great detail is taken in terms of documenting who was there when your head was made, who was there when the divination was thrown, and that is how they determine lineage, position, roles. Some might say I've taken a evangelical approach in that, now going back a little bit to my story, because of the abuse of my dad, I was on the street at 13. I had no choice. Thank the ancestors, I didn't get into drugs, I didn't end up in jail, I didn't end up in trouble, I didn't end up getting abused, I didn't end up getting exploited. What I did end up doing was having all this extra time to study something that I was deeply passionate about. One of the first things that I can remember at 1 or 2 being discussed in my family was voodoo. It was said that first my family was forced to walk Trail of Tears out of Florida and somehow ended up in Bogalusa. And they stayed in Bogalusa right up until the point that Bogalusa became an incorporated city, and then they moved to deeper into the Delta to Louise, Mississippi. So all I heard growing up was stories about frying pans with bacon in it and nobody was cooking bacon and ghosts interfering with the food in the house and voodoo. I even had a great uncle who was blind. And the story was a woman put something in his hat and he sweated and it dripped down into his eyes and he went blind. So the earliest story I can remember at 2, 3, 4 years old was about voodoo and how bad it was and how hush hush it was. My mother was the first college educated woman in her family. I grew up in the library. I grew up in Maryland, by the way. A part of the South that people forget is actually in the South. And the Smithsonian was my playground. I was allowed to play and be there all day long, and it was free. And of course, it kept me away from the violence of my dad. So the Natural History Museum and the whole displays of ancient Egypt and the whole displays of the African villages is where I grew up. So the idea of learning and studying voodoo at 13, 14, 15, 16 was not unusual for me. I sought those people out. I was a bit of a hippie, if you will. I moved from state to state, city to city for many years until I finally settled in New Orleans in 1995. New Orleans changed my life. It was the first place I ever felt real love. It was the first place I ever felt real support. It was the first place I ever felt safe. And even with the news and what we hear in the crime, I still feel completely safe in historic Tremaine. I really do. And it allowed me to grow into who I am today. It allowed me the time to study. I sat with Babalaos from Osogbo, from Oyo, Nigeria, from Ile Ife. It was the Hogan II from Benin who came here to Congo Square last summer and acknowledged me as the King of New Orleans Voodoo. It wasn't something I self-named. There were many elders there, much older than me, much more rooted in the community, who were there to witness and be present at that. And I take great honor in it. The reason for it is my dedication to this tradition. When you're a runaway with not a whole lot to do, you don't have a whole lot of time to do much else but to read, to study, to sit at the foot of elders and people who led me and guided me in the right path, in the right direction. I felt the same way as a masking Indian. It is the older Indians, 65 and older, 70 and older, who embraced me, who said, keep sewing. As long as you keep sewing, can't nobody tell you not to mask. You know, and that's what I get up with every day. So it is my honor to not only represent New Orleans, and I don't want to bore you all with telling you everything that I've been in. I've done a great deal of documentation, documentaries, commercials, movies, representing the city of New Orleans. It's my love, it's my passion. So it's my great honor to be able to come and speak to you today about the voodoo. I know you want to take a break. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Non-voodoo practitioners here associate voodoo with Marie Laveau, with snakes in Congo Square, with chicken blood in Congo Square. Where do those fit into an authentic voodoo tradition as a religious culture?
I'm gonna start with the snake. It is a snake that distinctly separates New Orleans voodoo from Haitian voodoo. Haitian voodoo practitioners don't dance with snakes. They mark snakes on the ground in representation of a deity known as Dambala or Dan in West Africa. But it is the Temple of Pythons in Ouida, Benin, where the association with voodoo and snake dancing come from. And we believe that's evidence of the presence of the voodoo coming straight from Benin to New Orleans. That's the first thing. The second thing is you often see the imagery of the woman and the serpent. And that's speaking back to Mami Wata, the great mother. And that also is emblematic of our association with West African voodoo as opposed to Haitian voodoo. What was the other thing you asked about?
Chicken blood.
Oh, right. Okay, now chicken blood is a reality. It's not spooky. It's not the scary thing that we often see demonstrated in movies. There was a legal case in, I believe it's Hialeah, Florida, that went to the Supreme Court about the use of animal sacrifice in terms of religion. And so that does allow people to use chickens, goats, pigs, in ritual ceremony. I'm here to tell you as the king of New Orleans voodoo, because I wouldn't lie to you, it absolutely happens. It doesn't happen every day. It's not something that every time you want to do something, it's about life, if that can make sense to you. It's really about life. The blood is seen as a life force in itself. And when blood is not utilized or available, we use palm oil, which is to mimic the life force of the blood. The birds or the animals are not discarded. They're eaten, they're cooked, much like your Popeyes and your Kentucky Fried Chicken, except your animal has been ritually consecrated, as opposed to the commercial farms that produce much of our store-bought meat. And I know that wasn't part of your question, but I felt a need to say that.
It follows the Old Testament traditions.
It does.
Perfectly. I mean,
Yes,
it's not
ma'am, it does.
anything unusual.
Yes, ma'am.
You had used the example earlier of God versus the devil. I know you showed us a lot of, quote, good voodoo deities. Does voodoo have a representation of evil?
We do. I also want to say, too, a great deal of what we know and been taught about Marie Laveau is fiction. First of all, if Marie Laveau were to do voodoo ceremonies, she wouldn't have had to walk all the way to Bayou St. John to do it. She could have done it right there in Armstrong Park, Congo Square, which would have been a swamp back then, which would have been a wasteland back then. So she wouldn't have had to do that. The idea of naked ceremonies on the bayou and all that stuff was created by an author. Forget my memory. I want to say it was in the 40s, the 50s, a white author who created a series of books. Yes, yes, that sexualized and fantasized about what the voodoo ceremonies were. So a great deal of what is now placed on Marie Laveau is not true. Even the imagery, light-skinned and the huge red wrap is sort of romanticized idea of what Marie may have really looked like. I really don't believe anyone knows exactly what shade she was or if she would have been heavier or thinner. So a great deal of that has been created by Hollywood and by fantasy and by our imaginations. Say your question for me again.
Does voodoo have a representative of evil?
Yeah, we do. Now, we don't have the polarities, much like the West, of good and bad. It's either absolutely good or it's absolutely bad. Much like Asia, the yin-yang symbol, if you understand, is half black, half white. It's about balance. We don't invite evil. We don't use evil to our own bidding. I describe that as witchcraft. That's witchcraft, which really has nothing to do with voodoo. The idea that you can control or bind either a person or a spirit to do your own bidding is witchcraft. That's ego. That's ego run amok. That's not what voodoo is. Voodoo is nature. And you can't have voodoo without nature. So there is a balance. We do have deities that represent sickness, disease, for instance. Sampana, which we now know as Babalu Oye, thanks to Ricky Ricardo in the Lucille Ball show. His most famous song was Babalu, and that was about Babalu Oye, whose more authentic name is Sampana, who was the god of smallpox. So this god,
Hi, for this one inject something like that because you mentioned Ricky Ricardo, and maybe you guys don't know it, but Ricky Ricardo's grandfather was born in Santiago de Cuba. It's the second most Afrocentric city in all of Cuba. Just FYI.
so even as early as that, the voodoo ideas were being projected at us through pop culture, and Ricky Ricardo was one of them. Babalu can protect you from great illness, but he can also bring it. And the idea of bringing it has to do with imbalance. When we allow our ego to get in the way, when we do things we know we shouldn't do, when we don't eat the right things, we then are creating imbalance, and then Sampana can bring that infirmity, that disease unto you. I can't make it any clearer. We don't use evil in the way that it's depicted in the Skeleton Key. We don't switch bodies and all that kind of stuff to do evil. That is a great appropriation. I would even say bastardization of what our tradition is.
So the whole term of gree-gree should not be associated with voodoo then?
Not in the way that it's often
Right.
used. I don't like the commercial appropriation of gree-gree. For instance, you should not be able to walk into a shop and pull a gree-gree out of a box. It don't work like that. A divination has to be done. It's marked on the board. In that Odu tells us what plants, what herbs, what roots might be needed to apply to a given situation. Now, when I start talking about plants, herbs, roots, that sounds like health. And at the root, that's what this is about. The ego-based request that we now have for it is something that has been supplanted onto voodoo through Western culture. Are you following me?
Yes.
And did I answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, great.
What is symbolic? You have a lot of jewelry and beads. Is there special symbolism behind?
It is. Of course, without nature, there will be no voodoo, and vice versa. It's also said that without Ifa, there could be no voodoo, and without voodoo, there could be no Ifa. And what that means is, again, without divination, without the sacred pattern, you don't have the code, the barcode in which to then apply any sort of healing, any sort of application. So we look at roots, trees, plants, animals, rocks, stones. And I often point to this in terms of how, we think of slaves as not owning anything, not having access to anything. And the idea that they would not have been able to hide things, I think is underrepresented in terms of telling the story. So our ability to find stones, seeds, organic matter that we would then apply and use has a lot to do with what's on my body. So many of my stones I've had 30 years or more. And they've been a part of me, my ritual, my service. In fact, these 3 pieces in particular I had set as a result of Hurricane Katrina. It was some of the few things that I was able to salvage from my house. I lived at Upper Lining Camp during Katrina. So we didn't get any flooding. We got looters and we got fire. Someone burned half of my block down during Hurricane Katrina. So my stones were some of the things that I was able to salvage. But they also represent my connection to the deities, my connection to the tradition. The beads are always emblematic of position and deities that we work with wherever you find the tradition in the world. So you're going to find these beads in Cuba, in Brazil, in Jamaica, in West Africa, and they're going to be a certain order, a certain color, a certain number, representing a code, particular deities, and then in terms of the question he asked earlier about position, who figures out who's what in the hierarchy in terms of position? That would also often be represented in the jury. This piece was given to me during my first initiation. This is a carved piece of bone from West Africa. It came separate from my ivory, but they both represent a deity known as Obatala. The deity of the white cloth is what Obatala means, white cloth. And again, that's the deity that governs the head, that creates the body. If we force him into some sort of amalgamation, he would be Father God in our tradition. Even though there's a God in our tradition, Olodumare, who's bigger than that, just like the God of all of us, who's bigger than that. We say Olodumare, we say Mawo, Lisa, which is a compound of a male energy and a female energy. So we don't see God as male or female. I often talk, and I feel like I've gotten off answering my question. Did I?
What about the colors and designs in your clothing?
Now, this is unique to me. It has a little bit of church in it. So you see some crosses and some religious symbolism, but the colors and the patterns also speak to major deities within the tradition. Of course, the white, Obatala, the black and the red represent Eshu. Some of you know Eshu as Legba. He opens and closes all doors. He's known to govern crossroads. So he would not need a shrine. He would not need a location for an enslaved African to invoke him. All they would need to do is gather dust from the crossroads. And we actually see that utilized in the movie Roots. I believe it's when Kizzy was being sold off, their parents picked up dirt, believing that holding on to the dirt, their footprint, would keep their spirit and would bring them back to that location. Yellow represents deities like Oshun, like Urzuli Frida in Haiti, freshwater spirits. We have freshwater spirits. We have saltwater spirits. We have deities that live where the river meets the ocean. We have deities that live, in the marshland. So they're represented by color, by symbols, by geometrics. But this is particularly unique to me.
May I take a picture?
Sure, please.
I did.
Please. Anybody else have a question?
What types of ceremonies are conducted?
Oh, that's a great question. It also allows me to speak to me being a licensed and certified minister. And many of you probably are already familiar with the Universal Life Church. I'm certified as a voodoo practitioner in the church. So I can marry, I can bury, and I can do everything in between. Coming of age ceremonies, for instance. So a parent might want their child, male or female child, to have a coming of age ceremony. Someone may come to me with a concern, career, education, health, something that's going on with the family. Beyond the fantasy stuff that you hear about, I think you all will be overwhelmingly surprised at who does come to me, who does ask for my advice, and the type of things that they ask about. I would say that they are the very things that you would ask your priest, your imam, the same things that you would request. I believe people have not necessarily fallen out of favor with organized religion, but don't feel as comfortable in that space the way we may have 50 or 60 years ago. And they are seeking alternatives. Everyone is not quickly turned on to the new age stuff, the fad-based stuff, and they do want something that has a little bit more of a root and a grounding in it. I do find myself being forced to have to re-educate. I do get crazy requests, and I have to say, listen, that's not what voodoo is. Please don't keep saying that. Don't keep associating that with voodoo. That's not what this is. Some people are even put off when I say this is a religion. There's a move to remove it out of the realm of religion. which I believe only supports the stores, the shops. Because they want to separate themselves from any sort of order so that they can just sell the product. So we do all sorts of ceremonies. People might be going in surgery, they call me. People might be having a child, they call me. People might be in some kind of financial distress, they call me. Teachers, lawyers, people who work for the government, other ministers. I have an alarming number of ministers who are a part of my clientele. And as a former evangelical member myself, it's alarming to me. What are you getting there where your tithes are being spent, but you now have to come to the hoodoo man to ask for help? That's what I'm trying to bring balance to.
Do you use drums as they are used in shamanic journeying to get into an altered state of consciousness?
Yes, ma'am, we do. Not only do we do what you all know that we do every Sunday in Congo Square, and usually when that's happening, I'm at the tree acknowledging the ancestors in Congo Square. But in our ceremonies, our private ceremonies, we absolutely use drumming, specific drum patterns call down specific deities for specific needs. And so we use drums, rhythm instruments, the bell, claves, hand clapping and rhythm in order to not only invoke the presence of that power and that spirit, but to coax people into sort of a trance-like state, much like you would see at church. I dare say if you turn the volume down on a really good sanctified church where the power is flowing, it's going to look a lot like voodoo. As she suggested, that many of the Old Testament rituals show up in voodoo. Any more questions? Any comments, any criticism?
It's fascinating.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
I want to thank Al for providing the transportation for Divine Prince. Thank you so much, and who also introduced us to this wonderful gentleman. So thank you for your information, your inspiration, for expanding our vision and helping us to understand better what you do.
I appreciate the opportunity. I meant every word of it when I said that this is probably the most important gig I've ever done.
Wow.
You all are my elders, you all are my community, some of you are my peers. And so this is more important than me being on TV, doing any number of movies. And so I appreciate your acceptance.
We're glad you like New Orleans.
Yes.
I'm going nowhere. If Katrina couldn't move me, nothing can move me. Nothing.
Okay, all right. I just have to explain, the last time I heard a lecture, we spoke till past, and then we took a 5-minute break, and then